Hello and welcome to this talk. My name is Andrew and I've been London Blue Badge Guide for over 40 years. Today I shall take a further look at some of the unusual, quirky or even odd things you can find on the streets of London, revealing ships, wandering statues and the cheerful memory of a cherry pie. There will also be a glimpse of people working on the streets, some unusual festive activities and the visit from a fabulous time-travelling elephant. Let us begin at Seven Dials, where a sundial pillar was put up in 1694 by Thomas Neal at the central crossing place in his development, and you might think this was it, but the paving commissioners decided otherwise. They became concerned at the way it attracted idlers and troublemakers who would sit on the steps, so in 1773 they had it removed. There is also a story that some locals had demolished it because they thought there was treasure buried underneath. An interesting tale, but I don't think it's true. The original pillar was taken to Weybridge and it's still there. This replica was made in 1989 from the original drawings by stonemason Edward Pierce, and it was unveiled by Her Majesty Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. There are actually only 6 sundial faces at the top, and one view is that the 7th dial is the pillar itself. To ensure accuracy for the new dials, an astronomer advised on setting them up so that each of the 6 faces has a different arrangement, and all are accurate to within 10 seconds, in apparent solar time that is. A nearby plaque provides details for the adjustments to apply for each month to discover mean solar time, or you could just look at your watch. When the original column was taken down at Seven Dials, it was acquired by architect James Payn for his house. In 1722, the stone column was moved again to the centre of Weybridge to become a memorial on Monument Green that commemorates local benefactress Prince Frederica, Duchess of York, who had died 2 years earlier nearby. The column was given a new base which bears the dedication inscription to the Duchess, and it also has a new top, surmounted by a ducal coronet. The original sundial top had become weathered, so it was repurposed as a mounting block and is now to be found beside Weybridge Library in Church Street. So that was the story of one moving sculpted landmark, and here is another that has moved from its original location. Although this 13-ton beast only moved short distances, it was even made nearby. The South Bank Lion at the Lambeth end of Westminster Bridge was made in 1837 for the Lion Brewery in Lambeth, and it was sculpted by William Woodington, curator of the Royal Academy's School of Sculpture. It's not made of stone, but from a very hard-wearing fired ceramic named Codestone. This was the largest casting ever produced in the material, as well as one of the last sculptures to be completed before the Lambeth Codestone works closed in that same year. After its removal from the brewery, the lion was placed on a plinth outside Waterloo Station, beside a gateway into the 1951 Festival of Britain, and it remained there until 1966, when it was moved to its present location on the bridge. This photograph, taken in 1932, shows the South Bank Lion in its original location, on top of the Lion Brewery's riverside parapet. The brewery had closed after a fire in 1931, but the lion remained a prominent landmark until 1949, when the buildings were to be demolished and the site cleared for building the Royal Festival Hall. There were many requests for this Blitz survivor to be saved, but it was the personal intervention by King George VI that made all the difference. The other prominent feature in this photograph is the Lambeth Shot Tower. There it is. Built for Thomas Maltby & Co. in 1826. This was used to make lead shot, for which molten metal was dropped from the top into a container of cold water at the base, which surprisingly produces perfectly round shot pellets. The tower was 163 feet, that's 50 meters high, and during the Festival of Britain the top was adapted to support a radio beacon. After that it was demolished and the Queen Elizabeth Hall was built over its site. Another wandering statue is this bronze of King James II, made in 1686 by sculptors Peter van der Voort and Lawrence van der Meulen. On the right is a recent photograph showing it in front of the National Gallery, but on the left is a photograph from 1897 showing it in its original location at Pebble Court, Whitehall, with its back to the rear of the banqueting house. The statue is an excellent likeness of the King and is similar to one of his brother and predecessor, King Charles II, which is at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, not illustrated here. In both statues, the monarchs are shown wearing Roman imperial armour, carrying a baton to indicate command, although the one for James has now been lost, and wearing a laurel wreath on top of short hair. James's statue was removed from its original position when the courtyard was cleared in 1901 for storage of materials during the preparations for the coronation of King Edward VII. But the statue was not returned, and it spent the following decades in storage. It was finally installed at its present location in front of the National Gallery in 1947. Major General Charles Gordon became a popular public figure from 1862, beginning with his action in China leading defeat of the murderous Taiping Rebellion. Gordon was a driven man, deeply religious and determined to make a difference in the world. This made him very difficult to deal with, as he wrote in his diary, "I know if I was chief I would never employ myself, for I am incorrigible." From 1876 he became Governor-General of Sudan, where he attempted to destroy the slave trade. In 1884, Gordon was sent to evacuate troops at Khartoum, threatened by the Mahdist uprising, but he decided to hold out and wait for a relief force. As this relief came close, Gordon was killed in the final assault on the city in 26 January 1885. This statue of Gordon by Hamo Thornycroft was erected in Trafalgar Square in 1888, as seen in the photograph on the left, with the National Gallery in the background. In 1943 it was removed to bring a Lancaster bomber here in order to raise money for war bonds, and the statue was reinstalled in Embankment Gardens behind the Ministry of Defence in 1953, where it is today, seen here on the right. Another statue of Gordon is even more widely travelled. This time a sculpture made in 1902 by Edward Onslow Ford that shows Gordon riding a camel. This once stood at St Martin's Lane, but then was moved to Khartoum in 1904. After Sudan's independence in 1958, it was brought back to Britain and installed at Gordon's School in Woking. Each year in January, Gordon's students parade throughout Whitehall to this statue in remembrance of his life. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, had an outstanding career as an army officer and commander, after which he became active in politics, taking 2 terms as Prime Minister. This statue was commissioned in 1837, when he was 68, to celebrate his achievements, and originally it was installed in 1846 at Hyde Park Corner. This recent photograph shows it at the present location on Round Hill in Aldershot, near All Saints Garrison Church. The sculpture was brought here in 1885, and over time trees and bushes grew up around it, giving it a neglected air for a long period. However, in 2004, clearance of the surrounding vegetation and restoration of the statue brought back its proper grandeur, for which this location seems much better suited than the original site, which you can now see. In this photograph, showing the statue on top of the Wellington Arch at Hyde Park Corner. The The Duke's home, Apsley House, is visible at the right edge, so just there. The sculptor, Matthew Coates Wyatt, produced this at his studio in Paddington, and its huge scale is evident from comparison with other features nearby. It's 30 feet, that's 9 meters tall, and 26 feet, that's 8 meters, from nose to tail, and the horse's legs were made solid to support its enormous weight. This is hardly surprising, as at 40 tons it is the largest bronze sculpture in Europe. After assembly of its parts in the foundry, the statue was transported here on a huge carriage with wheels 10 feet, that's 3 meters, in diameter, pulled by no less than 29 horses. Once the scaffolding had been removed and the statue was fully revealed, many adverse comments were made about it being too large for the setting, in particular from the magazine Punch, and there was some doubt expressed that the arch would withstand its weight, which fortunately it did. Queen Victoria is said to have disliked it, but the Duke made it known that its removal might be considered a mark of displeasure of him on the Queen's part, so it stayed until the arch was moved in 1883 to ease traffic. What are you looking at? Is stenciled street art painted in 2004 next to this CCTV camera for a concrete subway underpass at Hyde Park, close to the view of the previous slide. The Duke of Wellington had to cope with violence on the street in his lifetime, most notably when protesters against his government policies threw stones at his house and broke the windows. Many people are concerned at the amount of security surveillance on our streets, including appearance of this defiant sign by Banksy. This ceramic nose set in the centre of a block of stone was made from a cast of the artist's own nose, and very odd it looks. It's placed next to the North Gateway in Admiralty Arch. The nose is one of a number installed around central London in 1997 by artist Rick Buckley, who said he was provoked by the controversial use of CCTV cameras throughout London, and inspired by the Situationists, installed the noses under the noses of the cameras. Get it? Originally, there were about 35 of these, placed on buildings such as the National Gallery and Tate Britain, but by 2011 only about 10 remained. The prank was not publicised, and so many urban myths grew up, in particular about this one, most of which assume it's been in place for many years. Several Soho noses still remain at the time of writing, for example at Endell Street, Bateman Street, Dean Street and Great Windmill Street, with a different and larger type fixed to a wall in Mead Street. Some of the noses are quite easy to see, but others are more elusive. Before CCTV cameras, and even before street numbering, street signs were fixed onto the front of buildings to represent their address. In this example, Hawes Bank at 37 Fleet Street was referred to in its early days as "at the sign of the Golden Bottle," so that's the bottle. The old sign is still on the building alongside a double-headed eagle, the emblem of the Haw family. The bottle is a traditional type made of leather, and the original is preserved inside the bank. This London bank was started in 1672 by Richard Haw, and customers have included many famous literary folk, including the diarist Samuel Pepys, poet Lord Byron, and novelist Jane Austen. Other famous street signs include William Hogarth's house at the sign of the Golden Head in Leicester Fields, now Square, where he died in 1764. The earliest reference to a street being numbered was for Prescott Street in Goodman's Fields in 1708, but there was no London-wide regulation requiring numbering until 1855. Streets might have several series of numbers applicable to individual rows of houses. Even today, Londoners have a very careless attitude about clearly numbering their homes and business properties, as investigation along our streets will show you. The sign of the Dog and Pot was a familiar sight to 12-year-old Charles Dickens in 1824, when he was sent to work at Charing Cross to help support his family while his father was in debtor's prison at the Marshalsea. Dickens later wrote, "My usual way home was over Blackfriars Bridge and down that turning in the Blackfriars Road which has Rowland Hill's Chapel on one side and the likeness of a golden dog licking a golden pot over a shop door on the other." This Elmwood replica was made by carpenter and artist Michael Painter and installed here in 2013 at the corner of Blackfriars Road and Union Street. This was its original location, where it was a memorable landmark for the old ironmonger's shop that was here in Dickens's day, but has long gone. Look at the pavement nearby to see a replica cast iron coal hole cover, which also features the Dog and Pot. The original dog for the sign has not survived, but the pot has been on display at the Cumming Museum in Walworth Road. One type of property continues to use the old method of identifying itself with a sign, and that is for pubs. The George Hotel in Kingfisher Avenue, Wanstead, also has an interesting plaque on its external wall, preserved from an earlier building. There it is. A bit obscured by me, I'm afraid, but I'll read it out. It says, "In memory of the cherry pie, as cost half a guinea, ye 17th of July. That day we had good cheer. I hope to do so many a year. R.C. 1752, D. Terry." The story behind the plaque relates that in 1752 a workman working on a scaffolding in front of the pub reached out and stole a cherry pie from the tray of a passing baker. He was caught and brought before the magistrate, who fined him half a guinea, what we used to call 10 and 6. The pub was rebuilt in 1904, but the old plaque has been retained to relate this delightful story of the cherry pie. At Philpot Lane, on the cornice of the side wall for 23 Eastcheap in the city, is this small sculpture of two mice eating cheese. It originates at the construction of this building in 1862 as offices and warehousing for Messrs. Hunt and Crombie, spice merchants. Two of the builders found their lunch was mysteriously disappearing, and eventually they found mice had been responsible. They left this little memento of the theft as London's smallest public sculpture. 2 years after the mice appeared, in 1864, this fine cast iron insignia was installed at the south end of the bridge for the new London, Chatham and Dover Railway. Blackfriars Railway Bridge was designed by Joseph Cubitt, who was at the same time rebuilding the adjoining road bridge. The station was also on the south side, next to this insignia, but it closed when another Blackfriars Railway Bridge was built here in 1886, terminating at St Paul's Station on the North Bank, and later that was renamed Blackfriars Station. The through line across the bridge closed in 1971, and the superstructure was removed in 1985, but the supports were left standing because removal of their foundations would have been too disruptive. Further upstream, Vauxhall Bridge is the only Thames bridge with bronze statues on each of the piers. These are allegorical figures, and this one, representing architecture, holds in the palm of her left hand a miniature version of St Paul's Cathedral. Vauxhall Bridge was built in steel due to the poor load bearing of the clay subsoil. It was designed by Alexander Binney, and it opened in 1906 with the 8 2-ton bronze statues added a year later to make it more visually appealing. Frederick Pomeroy is the sculptor of the allegorical figures on the upstream side, representing, from the left, agriculture, architecture, engineering and pottery. Those facing downstream are education, local government, fine arts and science, sculpted by Alfred Drury. Details of the statues are difficult to make out unless they're seen from a boat, so Thames watermen were the ones responsible for naming this model church Little St Paul's upon the Water. Here you see a bundle of straw hanging under Waterloo Bridge, and you may wonder why it's there. The bundle is an ancient signal to show the arch has restricted headroom from its usual limit. This is not just picturesque nonsense. It is required under the current Port of London Authority River By-law 36, which provides if headroom in an arch is reduced from its usual limits, it must be signalled to river traffic using by day a bundle of straw large enough to be conspicuous, and by night a white light. Straw has been used for the daytime signal for several practical reasons. It was readily available, it was cheap, and it was easily made into a conspicuous bundle. Leaving the river, we now look at this statue tucked into a corner of Leadenhall Street in the City of London, on the former site of the offices for the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, or P&O, formed in 1822. The allegorical figure represents navigation by sculptor Percy Bentham, so there's the title there. And it dates from 1922, made when an extension of the offices was opened. The ship the figure is holding on the crook of his left arm is Noldera. There it is. The first three-funnel P&O ship. The offices on this site were redeveloped in 1969 and again in 2014 for the Leadenhall building, popularly known as the Cheese Grater. The striped pole beside the statue is the Cornhill Maypole, which was traditionally set up beside the nearby church of St Andrew Undershaft, the origin of that church's name, and is referred to by Chaucer. The maypole there was sawn up and burned in 1547 by a Puritan mob after it had been denounced in a sermon as a pagan idol. The maypole was reinstated some years later, and here is an early 17th century illustration of one, decorated with greenery at the top and a festive garland. Elizabethan John Stowe's survey of London tells us more of the St Andrew's maypole. Every year on May Day in the morning it was used that a high or long shaft or maypole was set up there in the midst of the street before the south door of the church, which shaft, when it was set on end and fixed in the ground, was higher than the church steeple. From 1644, maypoles were banned by an Act of Parliament, which described them as a heathenish vanity, generally abused to superstition and wickedness. But at the restoration of King Charles II in 1660, maypoles reappeared and the traditional celebrations were permitted again. This sculpture is a different allegorical interpretation of navigation, this time by Charles Doman, made in 1909. It's situated in Savage Gardens, on the site of the original headquarters of the Port of London Authority, a building adapted in 2017 to become the Four Seasons Hotel. In these modern days with GPS systems, navigation skills can seem to be rather less vital than they once were. Accurate navigation using Admiralty charts and instruments from the City of London created the British Merchant Service, which by 1939 was the largest commercial maritime fleet in the world, with 33% of total tonnage. By 2012, the British Merchant Navy, although 18th largest in the world, had only 0.8% of total deadweight tonnage registered under its flag. However, the UK fleet of ships owned, part-owned or managed in the UK is considerably larger, amounting to 4% of the total. This plaque is under the main ground floor window on the front of the Ship pub at Hart Street in the city. On the right are two three-masted ships, with two smaller vessels on the left being thrown about by the waves. Perhaps they were merely symbolic of the pub's name, but they do suit an area of the city where shipping was very important. The listed building dates from 1887, the year of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, and it was restored in 2014 with the elaborately moulded front repainted to highlight its festoons of seaweed and grapes. A curious combination. This panel is part of a memorial to Admiral Arthur Phillip, who in January 1788 landed at Botany Bay and founded the first British colony in Australia. The memorial was originally attached to the front of St Mildred Bread Street in the city, but that church was destroyed by bombing in 1941, so the memorial has been restored and attached to a small gabled structure in Watling Street opposite the One New Chain shopping centre. The first of the 11-strong First Fleet to arrive in Australia was HMS Supply, shown in this panel as a rowing boat pulls from the ship towards the shore, carrying Phillip and his staff. The vessel was a two-masted armed tender built on the Thames at Rotherhithe and, as the name indicates, designed to ferry naval supplies. It was a mere 80 feet, that's 24 metres long. Phillip decided to choose a new site for the settlement, which he named Sydney, after the Home Secretary who had ordered the expedition. Against heavy odds and despite significant shortages, Governor Phillip was responsible for the success of the settlement, and by the time he sailed home in 1792, the colony was making good progress. Holland House at 32 Berry Street in the city was designed by Hendrik Bellage and built in 1916 for the Dutch William H. Muller Shipping Company. The steel frame building is clad in unusual grey-green faience tiles, influenced by the new commercial office blocks being built in New York, which Bellage had seen on a visit in 1911. Beside the entrance is this splendid stylized steamship prow in polished black granite, ploughing forward as waves curl out from the bow. The sculptor was Joseph Mendes da Costa, whose father's stone-cutting workshop must have influenced his choice of career. Here is a somewhat larger ship's bow, in this case outside the London offices of the International Maritime Organization at 4 Albert Embankment. The IMO is a specialized United Nations agency representing 174 member states, founded in 1948 with its headquarters in London. It moved into this building in 1982, and the huge Seafarers Memorial by sculptor Michael Sandel was unveiled in 2001. This 23 feet high, that's 7 metres, representation in bronze of a cargo ship's bow has a lone seafarer on deck, about to throw the line held in his/her right hand. The sculpture's prominence and dramatic configuration make this a reminder of the vital role seafaring plays in world trade, as well as being a memorial to those who have been lost at sea. The seafarer on the previous slide is a reminder that some people work outside, and these days many require specialised safety gear. Street sweepers now wear high-vis jackets, but in the City of London in the 1930s, a peak cap seemed to be the only special gear provided. These cleansing operatives are pausing to ease their blisters, standing at the corner of King Street and Gresham Street, with the church of St Lawrence Jewry in the background. Beekeepers on the roof of Tate Modern Art Gallery. Steve Benbow started the first beehive in 2002 on the roof of his tower block in Bermondsey, and today he runs 30 sites across the city, including beehives on the rooftops of Fortnum and Mason, the National Portrait Gallery, here at Tate Modern, and also at Tate Britain. Steve has written a book about his work, The Urban Beekeeper, A Year of Bees in the City. The beekeeper on the left is holding a smoker, and the smoke from this will mask the bees' sense of smell, inhibiting the release of alarm signals. The white clothes of these beekeepers help prevent the bees feeling they are under attack from a predator. Love those spats. So there's the smoker. As underground trains pass through the deep tunnels, they draw in light debris, including hair and flakes of skin from the passengers. This team of women at work in 1953 are fluffers, removing the dust and dirt from tunnels before it builds up and causes problems. Their successors still work at night in maintenance gangs, but they are given high-vis jackets, masks, protective overalls and hard hats for protection against the hazards of the job. From 1976, a tunnel cleaning train came into use, nicknamed the Big Yellow Duster, but it has since been withdrawn from service. A projected replacement turned out to be unable to cope with the challenging conditions, and the contract to build it was cancelled in 2014, leaving the manual teams to continue at this unremitting task. Here you can see a flusher, one of the maintenance staff who keep the drains and sewers flowing, about to descend into the maze of sewers below London. They always check the weather first to make sure there are no sudden rushes of rainwater that will catch them unawares. When it rains heavily, the trunk sewers can fill remarkably quickly, sometimes right up to the top. The pressure of fast-moving water is deceptively powerful, and a flusher could easily be swept away. Another serious hazard for the maintenance staff is from a build-up of sewer gases, such as methane, so gas monitors are carried at all times. There is a full-time workforce of 45, based at 3 depots around London, although contractors are also brought in when required. You may wonder what causes people to take a job like this, but it certainly isn't the financial reward. There is a camaraderie within the team and a feeling of satisfaction from a job well done. We should be grateful for their work, keeping the water and other things safely contained. Some of the jobs on the street have vanished over time, such as this farrier. The story of his work is presented by this sculpture at Stables Market in Camden. Shoeing horses is an occupation that requires blacksmithing skills to make the shoes, as you would expect, but just as important are veterinary skills to make sure the horse's feet are kept healthy. By 1900 there were 300,000 horses in London, and every horseshoe on every horse should be trimmed and reset every 4 to 6 weeks, which meant a lot of work for farriers. The work continues today, but on a vastly smaller scale. A horse hoof is similar to a human fingernail, which grows and requires regular attention. The farrier had to select the proper shoe, and then a portable forge heats the steel. The shoe is shaped on the anvil and checked against the cleaned hoof, with a burst of smoke that looks alarming, followed by painless nailing on. A fire-welded horseshoe will protect the hoof wall from chipping or cracking, and seal it to keep out excess moisture. The Shard, at 1,016 feet, that's 310 metres, is one of the tallest buildings in Europe. It has a team of 6 abseiling cleaners for its 11,000 glass panes, which cover a total area of 56,000 square metres. It takes the team around 3 months to complete the entire glass facade, after which they start all over again. These 4 are abseiling down the building, and when they're not larking about, they clean the glass with simple squeegees. This system is called rope access cleaning, but where it's possible the team use a mobile elevated platform suspended from the articulated arm, that's this one here. Window cleaners on tall buildings are not allowed to work in winds that exceed 20 miles an hour, and they must be specially qualified and insured for the work, using skills that often begin from an interest in climbing or caving. They can descend, ascend, or change from one rope to another, and when I looked at different sources to check the details for this work, I was astonished to find it often said that these guys must have a head for heights. I should think so. The River Thames is the longest continuous archaeological site in Britain. A rubbish dump into which objects have been accidentally dropped or intentionally thrown during 2,000 years of human activity along the river foreshore. The range of items buried in the mud with every tide is astonishing, ranging from Neolithic mud flint tools to 19th century clay pipes. There are shards of pottery and glassware from all ages, all kinds of bones and buttons, badges, gadgets, children's toys or lovers' tokens, all mixed together with pieces of brick, concrete and gravel. Mudlarks in the 19th century were people who searched the tidal areas of the river for anything of value that might keep them fed. Modern mudlarks have a love of the river, where they're separate from the frenetic life above and can search for something other. Mudlarks share a passion for discovering and enjoying fragments of London's rich history they have found along the river's edge. Their equipment includes a tide table to avoid being trapped, thick gloves, waterproof shoes, a backpack with bags for fines, and a foreshore permit from the Port of London. To find out more, read Lara Makelam's book, Mudlarking, Lost and Found on the River Thames. London's Soho Waiters race began in the 1950s and is seen here in 1955. Maintained by the Soho Society and run in June or July as part of the Soho Village Fete, the race starts at about 3 p.m. from the French House in Dean Street, turns into Soho Square, then Greek Street and Old Compton Street before finishing in front of Jerry's Wines and Spirits. The extraordinary sight has about 40 waiters in the race, all intent on safely delivering a half bottle of champagne on a tray with a glass and an ashtray. The race was inspired by the older Course de Garçons de Café in Paris, which has been run since 1900. One of the ancient trade guilds in the City of London is the Worshipful Company of Vintners, who received their first charter in 1363. Every year in July, the company elects a new master, celebrated afterwards with a special service at the nearby church of St. James, Garlickhythe. The master and officers of the company walk in a short procession from the Livery Hall in Thames Street to the church, with the wine porter in white smock and top hat leading the way to sweep the street clear with a birch broom. A reminder that at one time the streets were not clean and paved as they are today. Behind him is the barge master, followed by stavesmen, carrying nosegays to sweeten the air in the smelly streets. Just visible at the back on the right is a swan's feather in the hat of the swan marker. The Vintners Company has owned swans since at least the 15th century, and these are weighed, marked and measured in July every year at Swan Upping. Here we have the 2020 Shrove Tuesday Interlivery Pancake Race at the Guildhall Yard in the city. This event raises money for the Lord Mayor's nominated charity, taking only teams from livery companies linked in some way to pancakes. It is hosted by the Worshipful Company of Poulters, who provide the eggs. The fruiters come with lemons, the glovers bring white gloves worn by each runner, and the cutlers supply forks. Any company that can find a connection is liable to be drawn in. So the gun makers bring along a small cannon to start each race, and the clock makers time the heats. Participants have the choice between running in full livery robes, heavy but traditional, or in fancy dress. This event should not be confused with the Leadenhall Market Pancake Race, where contestants from city law, banking and accountancy firms race for their own highly coveted frying pan trophy. Finally, let me end with a magnificent show on London streets, unlikely ever to be repeated. It took place over 4 days in May 2006, when Londoners were captivated by the sight of this enormous mechanical elephant. It weighed 42 tons, and a giant puppet girl walking through the streets in a show entitled "Visit from the Sultan of the Indies on his time-travelling elephant." It was an extraordinary piece of surreal outdoor theatre, and here we see the Sultan's elephant in front of the National Gallery. The elephant was mainly built of wood by the French company Royal Deluxe, and it was operated by 22 manipulators using a system of hydraulics and motors. The show began early on Thursday, 4th of May, with a rocket suddenly appearing in Waterloo Place, seemingly having crashed down into the tarmac and standing in the middle of the road with smoke issuing from underneath. It was all very puzzling, and the police who had cleared the way for the huge puppets had a great time inventing explanations during the setup that did not reveal the surprises to come over the next few days. So that brings my talk to an end. I hope it's alerted you to some more of the interesting and curious things to find on the streets of London. Do have fun looking out for yourself for more things like those when you walk around London. And as ever, thanks for listening. If you'd like to take part in one of my London walks, please look at my website, guidedlondonwalks.com.